What gives them the right to board before me, before Platinum Premier flyers? This is an absolute disgrace. These were the words of Karen Miller, a woman who believed status was everything. When she saw the Harrison family, a black family of 4 invited to board the plane, first her privilege turned to public outrage. She mocked them, she reported the gate agent, and she fumed in her first-class seat. But Karen had no idea who she was messing with. She was on a collision course with a truth so powerful it would not only silence her, it would cost her everything 30,000 feet in the air. The sterile, buzzing light of JFK's Terminal 4 did nothing to improve Karen Miller's mood. It was 6:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the air was thick with the smell of Cinnabon and stale coffee. Karen, immaculate in a steel-grey pantsuit, tapped her lacquered fingernails against the screen of her phone. She was closing a deal, or rather, she was en route to London to close a deal that would make her and her firm, AeroCore Solutions, obscenely wealthy. Her title was Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, but she preferred the internal title her subordinates used, the closer. She was flying International Business Class Seat 1A on Transatlantic Air, Flight 112. Her Platinum Premier status, which she'd earned through 200,000 miles of relentless, brutal corporate warfare, was her gospel. "No, Dennis, I don't care what their counteroffer is," she hissed into her AirPods. "You tell Sterling Price that our AeroCore stabilizer is the future. Their current system is a dinosaur. I want them bleeding, Dennis. I want them begging us for the tech by the time I land at Heathrow." "Got it." She ended the call without waiting for a reply and surveyed Gate B24. It was chaos. Families with screaming children, college students sprawled on the floor, the weary masses she felt she had rightfully risen above. Her gaze snagged on a family sitting quietly near the window. A man and woman, likely in their late 40s, a teenage boy staring intently at a tablet, and a younger girl, maybe 10, reading a book. They were black. They seemed ordinary. Too ordinary for the prime seating they were occupying near the boarding lane. Karen mentally dismissed them. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman in her 30s with a name tag reading Susan Jenkins, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was tinny. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will shortly begin boarding Transatlantic Air Flight 112 to London Heathrow. We are fully booked this evening." Karen snapped her briefcase shut and stood positioning herself precisely at the front of the Platinum Premier lane. She would be the first on the plane. She would have her glass of champagne. She would have her noise-cancelling headphones on. She would win. At this time, Susan continued, her voice straining slightly, "We would like to extend a special invitation to pre-board to the Harrison family. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison and Elijah and Maya, please make your way to the podium." Karen's head snapped toward the family by the window. They stood up. The father, David Harrison, gave the agent a small, weary nod. The mother, Maria, gently took her daughter Maya's hand. The son, Elijah, slung a backpack over his shoulder. They were the Harrison family. They walked past the stanchions, past the first-class sign, and directly toward the jet bridge. A hot, acidic anger rose in Karen's throat. This was a breach of protocol, a violation of the sacred order. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Susan Jenkins looked up, startled. "Yes, ma'am." "Why are they boarding?" Karen jerked her chin toward the family, who had paused their backs to her. Susan blinked. "I'm sorry. Them," Karen repeated louder this time. The entire gate area went quiet. Why are they boarding before Platinum Premier? They don't have military identification. They don't have a passenger in a wheelchair. They aren't struggling with 5 toddlers. So why? Susan's face flushed. This was the moment every gate agent dreaded. Ma'am, the Harrison family was extended a special invitation by the airline to pre-board. A special invitation? Karen laughed, a short, barking sound. What does that mean? What makes them so special? I've spent over $40,000 with this airline this year. I am a Platinum Premier member. The rules state that I board first. This is reverse discrimination. The word hung in the air, ugly and heavy. David Harrison turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were ancient, with a patience that seemed stretched to its limit. His wife Maria placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder, who was vibrating with a silent teenage fury. "Ma'am?" Susan said, her voice dropping to a professional, icy calm. "This is a courtesy extended by our corporate office and the flight crew. It is non-negotiable." "Oh, corporate," Karen sneered. "I'll be speaking to corporate. I'll be speaking to your supervisor. This is an outrage. Is it because it's November? Are we giving out special treatment for some reason this month?" The racist insinuation was unmistakable. It was bull and it was loud. Maria Harrison's eyes snapped shut for a second, as if absorbing a physical blow. David stepped forward, putting himself between Karen and his family. "Ma'am," David said, his voice deep and quiet. "We just want to get to our seats. We don't want any trouble." "Then you should have waited your turn," Karen snapped. "Like everyone else. But you people who always want a handout, don't you? A special invitation. It's pathetic." "That's enough." The voice didn't come from Susan. It came from an older, distinguished Asian man sitting in the first-class seating area. He wore a simple but impeccably tailored suit. He was watching Karen with profound disappointment. "You are making a spectacle of yourself, madam. Let the family board." Karen shot him a venomous look. "Mind your own business. This is a matter of policy." Susan, seeing her chance, spoke into her microphone. "Mr. Harrison, please. Go ahead." She nodded to the jet bridge, her eyes apologizing for what Karen had done. David held Karen's gaze for one more second. There was no anger in it, only a deep, profound pity. It infuriated Karen more than any insult could have. He turned, gathered his family, and they disappeared down the ramp. "I want your name," Karen spat at Susan, pulling out her phone. "Susan Jenkins, I'm reporting you, and I'm filing a formal complaint against this airline. This is the worst service I have ever received." Susan just nodded, her face pale. "I understand, ma'am. We will now begin boarding our Platinum Premier passengers. Ms. Miller, you may board." "It's about time," Karen muttered. She shoved her boarding pass at the scanner and stomped down the jet bridge, the righteous fury of the truly entitled burning in her chest. She was going to get Susan fired. She was going to get a $1,000 voucher, and she was going to destroy her competitors in London. She always got what she wanted. The recycled air of the Boeing 787's business class cabin was a welcome relief. Karen Miller settled into Seat 1A, the plush, high-walled pod, cocooning her from the general public. A flight attendant with a warm smile and a name tag reading Ben Carter appeared almost instantly. "Ms. Miller, welcome aboard. Can I get you a glass of champagne orange juice or a mimosa before takeoff?" "Champagne," Karen said, not looking up from her phone, as she typed a furiously worded email to Transatlantic's customer service. "And make sure it's the good stuff, not the Prosecco you serve in the lounge." "Of course, ma'am. We're serving the Bollinger tonight." Ben replied, his smile not faltering. He was a consummate professional. As he left, Karen heard movement in the row behind her. She glanced back and her blood pressure spiked. It was them, the special Harrison family. They weren't just pre-boarding. They were in business class. The whole family. In pods 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. How had they afforded this 4 international business class tickets? It was outrageous. This had to be some sort of affirmative action giveaway. Some PR stunt. The father David was helping his daughter Maya with her seatbelt. The mother Maria was speaking in a low, soothing voice to her son Elijah, who was still visibly angry, staring out the window, his jaw tight. Karen leaned into the aisle as Ben returned with her champagne on a small tray. "Excuse me, Ben," she said in a voice that was just loud enough for row 2 to hear. "I'm just so embarrassed. Does Transatlantic now give away business class seats to just anyone? It really dilutes the brand, don't you think? It makes my platinum status feel rather pointless." Ben Carter's smile finally cracked, replaced by a mask of polite neutrality. He had heard Karen's tirade at the gate. The entire crew had. "The airline has many different programs for its valued guests, ma'am," he said stiffly. He placed the champagne on her tray table with a precise click. "We are very happy to have the Harrison family on board with us this evening. They are our special guests." "Special guests?" Karen muttered into her glass, taking a large, unladylike gulp. "Right, I'm sure." The gentleman who had spoken up at the gate, Mr. Arthur Chen, was now settling into seat 1B across the aisle from her. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable, and then deliberately opened his newspaper, a physical barrier of dismissal. Karen bristled. Who did he think he was? She turned back to her work, forcing her mind onto the AeroCorps pitch. The presentation was flawless. It was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. She had slides with leaked by her data showing the instability of the Aegis stabilization system, the very system used by this airline and countless others. Her data, entirely fabricated but terrifyingly plausible, suggested a 1 in a million chance of harmonic resonance failure under specific atmospheric conditions. It was a lie, but it was a good lie. It would be enough to spook the investors at sterling price. They would dump their stock in the Aegis parent company and buy into AeroCorps. It was brilliant. The plane taxied, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was a smooth, authoritative baritone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard Flight 112 to London. This is your Captain Robert Henderson speaking. We've got a smooth flight time of 6 hours and 45 minutes. Weather in London is a bit drizzly, so we'll try to get you there a few minutes early." He paused, and the smooth voice warmed. "On a personal note, I and the entire crew are exceptionally honored to have some very special guests on board with us tonight, joining us in the business cabin. We're thrilled to have you with us, and we wish you the very best in London." Karen rolled her eyes so hard she almost sprained a muscle. Honored. They were laying it on thick. She sipped her champagne. She almost felt sorry for them. They were probably being paraded around for some PR campaign, completely unaware that they were just pawns. The plane took off a powerful, graceful surge that pressed Karen back into her seat. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, she heard a quiet sound from the row behind her. The little girl, Maya, was coughing. It wasn't a sick cough, but a nervous one. "Mom, my ears hurt," the girl whimpered. "I know, baby," Maria's voice replied, calm and maternal. "Here, chew this piece of gum. It will help them pop, just like we practiced. It's loud, I know, But think about the adventure. We're going to see the big clock, remember, and the palace." Karen let out an exaggerated, put-upon sigh. She clicked on her headphones and jacked up the volume of her Power Focus playlist. She would not be disturbed. She had work to do. She began to review her presentation, her lips moving silently as she rehearsed her killer opening lines. "The Aegis system," she whispered to herself, "is a relic, a dangerous, unstable relic, and I have the proof." Behind her, Maria Harrison watched her daughter chew the gum, her brow furrowed with a worry that had nothing to do with the plane's altitude. David reached across the aisle and squeezed his wife's hand. She gave him a small, tired smile. Elijah had his headphones on, the music bleeding out a fast, angry hip-hop beat that was the only voice for the rage he felt. He had seen the woman in 1A. He had heard every word she said. And in that moment, he hated her. He hated the way she looked at his family. He hated the way she made his father, his hero, look small. 3 hours into the flight, they were somewhere over the dark, icy expanse of the North Atlantic. The cabin was quiet, dim. Most passengers were asleep or watching movies. Karen Miller was wide awake, her laptop screen glowing in the dark, her mind buzzing with calculations and stock projections. She was on her 3rd glass of champagne. Suddenly, the calm was broken. A call button chimed sharp and insistent from the economy cabin. Then it chimed again and again. Ben Carter, who had been tidying the galley, hurried down the aisle. A moment later, his voice came over the PA, and it had lost all its manufactured warmth. It was sharp with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency in row 34. If you are a medical professional, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately." The cabin lights snapped on, harsh and fluorescent. Passengers woke up confused and blinking. Karen groaned in annoyance. A medical emergency. That meant a potential diversion. Gander or Reykjavik. It would make her late. This was exactly what she didn't need. "Typical," she muttered to Mr. Chen, who was reading a book. "Someone probably just drank too much and got scared." Mr. Chen didn't even look at her. "Is there a doctor on board?" Ben repeated, his voice rising in panic. "We need a doctor now." From the seat behind Karen, there was a click, the sound of a seatbelt being unfastened. Karen turned, annoyed, to see who was causing the commotion. It was Maria Harrison, the mother. She was standing in the aisle, her face a mask of intense, focused calm. She looked at Ben, who was rushing back toward the galley. "I'm a doctor," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the cabin's rising panic with surgical precision. Ben stopped, his eyes wide. "You are Dr. Maria Harrison. I'm a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins. What's the situation?" Ben's relief was palpable. An older gentleman, mid-60s. He clutched his chest and collapsed. I think he's unconscious. He's not responding." Maria was already moving. "Get me your full medical kit, the AED, and an oxygen tank. Now. Tell your colleagues to clear the aisle." She was gone, disappearing through the curtain into the economy cabin, her movements quick and certain. Karen Miller sat stunned. A doctor, a cardiologist, at Johns Hopkins. That was one of the best hospitals in the world. It didn't fit Karen's narrative. It didn't compute. The woman she had dismissed as a handout seeker, the quiet, mousy wife, was a high-level medical professional. The next 20 minutes were a blur of hushed, tense activity. Ben and another flight attendant raced back and forth, bringing supplies. Passengers in the front of economy were moved to empty seats in the back to give them space. Karen, unable to help herself, unbuckled and stood peering through the curtain. She saw Maria Harrison on her knees in the aisle next to a pale, unmoving man. She had ripped his shirt open. "He's in VFib," Maria's voice commanded. "I'm charging the AED. Clear!" A thump echoed through the cabin. "No pulse. Compressions. She pointed at Ben. "You're trained. Start compressions, hard and fast, 120 beats per minute. I'll bag him." For several agonizing minutes, the only sounds were Maria's sharp commands, Ben's grunting efforts, and the rhythmic whoosh of the oxygen bag. David Harrison had come to stand at the curtain, his face etched with concern watching his wife work. Elijah and Maya were huddled in their seats, their faces pale. "He's back," Maria said, finally. Her voice tight with exhaustion as she listened with her stethoscope. "Sinus rhythm. It's weak, but it's steady. Get me an IV kit. We need to push fluids and aspirin." A wave of applause, spontaneous and emotional, erupted from the economy passengers who had been watching. Karen sank back into her seat, her cheeks burning. She felt wrong. Not guilty, not yet. But wrong. The woman she had racially profiled, the woman she had sneered at, had just saved a man's life in the middle of the ocean. The noise from row 2 was the sound of a family trying to cope while their matriarch fought for a stranger's life. An hour later, the captain's voice returned. "Folks, as you're aware, we had a medical emergency on board. I'm overjoyed to report that the passenger is now in stable condition. This is thanks entirely to the swift, heroic actions of one of our passengers, Dr. Maria Harrison. She is a cardiologist and, well, to be frank, she just saved that man's life. We have been in contact with medical authorities on the ground. Dr. Harrison has stabilized him so well that they see no need to divert. We will be met by an ambulance at the gate in Heathrow. Maria, on behalf of the entire crew, thank you. You are a true hero." The cabin, both business and economy, erupted in applause. Maria Harrison finally returned to her seat. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly mussed, a smear of something on her sleeve. She sank into her pod. Her husband David leaned over and kissed her forehead. Her son Elijah just looked at her, his earlier anger replaced with a look of raw, undisguised pride. Karen Miller stared at her laptop screen. The words blurred. Her pitch, her brilliant lie about instability and risk suddenly felt cheap, small. She took a sip of her champagne. It tasted sour. The fragile peace of the cabin, restored after the medical drama, lasted for another hour. They were past the halfway point, a tiny pressurized world hurtling through the pre-dawn darkness. Karen, unsettled, had abandoned her work and was trying to sleep a silk mask over her eyes. It started as a vibration, not the familiar rumbling hum of the 787's massive engines. This was a different frequency, a high-pitched harmonic whine that seemed to drill directly into her teeth. Karen ripped off her mask. The plane was shuddering, not with the rolling, predictable motion of turbulence, but with a violent, terrifying shake. Then they dropped. It wasn't a dip. It was a plunge. A genuine stomach-in-your-throat 0G fall that lasted for 3 full seconds. Passengers screamed. Glasses and laptops crashed to the floor. Red wine knocked from a tray table, splattered across the bulkhead like a crime scene. Karen, a seasoned flyer, felt a spike of pure, unadulterated terror. This was not turbulence. This was wrong. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed frantically, accompanied by a deafening alarm. The plane stabilized, but the shaking continued. The high-pitched whine from the right side of the aircraft was getting louder, changing in pitch like a giant invisible drill. "What is that? What's that sound?" a man in row 3 yelled. Ben Carter, his face ashen, was gripping a bulkhead for support. "Everyone, please stay in your seats. Fasten your seatbelts. Now." The plane lurched again, this time to the left, so violently that Karen was thrown against the wall of her pod. Panic, real and acidic, was rising in her throat. She could hear the girl Maya crying behind her. And then she heard David Harrison's voice. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't praying. He was listening. Karen risked a glance back. He was unbuckled, kneeling on his seat, his head pressed against the window, his eyes closed. His wife, Maria, was holding on to his belt, her face a mask of terror. "David, what is it?" "Sit down," Maria pleaded. "That sound," David whispered, his eyes snapping open. "That's not blade-off. That's not a stall. That's... oh God. No." The whining sound peaked, and the entire plane felt like it was being torn in half. The lights flickered, died, then came back on at half power. The captain's voice blasted over the PA, strained and tight with G-force. "Flight attendants, take your seats. Take your seats. We are... The PA crackled with static, then cut out. David Harrison was in the aisle. He grabbed Ben Carter's arm. Ben, terrified, tried to shake him off. "Sir, you must sit down." "Get me the captain," David said. His voice was not a request. It was a command backed by an authority that dwarfed everyone's panic. "Sir, I can't do that." "We are in an emergency. You tell him," David said, his eyes locking with Ben's, "that the starboard GNX is in harmonic resonance. You tell him they have about 90 seconds before the turbine disintegrates. Tell him David Harrison is on board." Ben stared, dumbfounded. The technical jargon, the impossible specificity, the name, it was enough. He grabbed the intercom phone by the galley. Captain Henderson, I have a passenger here. He says the starboard engine is in harmonic resonance. He says it's going to disintegrate. He says his name is David Harrison." The cabin was a symphony of sobs and prayers. Karen was clutching her armrests, her knuckles white. Harmonic resonance. The exact obscure 1 in a million scenario she had fabricated for her pitch. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. The intercom crackled. It was the captain's voice, but not for the passengers. It was for Ben, but loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "Harrison, David Harrison is on board. Get him up here. Get him in the cockpit. Now!" Ben dropped the phone and nodded. David was already moving. He ran unsteady in the bucking cabin toward the cockpit. He punched in the security code. He knew the code, and the reinforced door hissed open. He disappeared inside. The cabin was left in a state of terrified confusion. "What's happening?" Mr. Chen asked, his voice shaking. "Why did they let him in?" Karen whispered, her mind reeling. Is he a pilot? He's going to fly the plane," someone else cried. Maria Harrison had her children in her arms. She was holding them tight, her eyes shut, her lips moving in a silent prayer. For 5 minutes the plane continued its terrifying dance. The whine was an omnipresent scream. Every rivet and panel seemed to be shaking itself apart. This was it, Karen thought. This is how I die. All my work, my deals, my status. It means nothing. I'm going to die in a metal tube over an ocean because of a sound. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound changed. It didn't stop, but the pitch dropped. The agonizing, tooth-rattling whine descended into a low, manageable groan. The violent, bone-jarring shaking eased, becoming a heavy, rhythmic shudder. The plane was still sick, but it was no longer tearing itself apart. Another 10 minutes passed. An eternity. The cockpit door opened. David Harrison emerged. He looked like he had aged 20 years. He was pale, covered in sweat, but he was calm. He walked back to his seat, knelt, and pulled his wife and children into a 4-person hug, burying his face in his daughter's hair. Karen just stared. Who was this man? The silence in the cabin was heavier and more terrifying than the screams had been. They were flying, but the right engine was clearly crippled. The plane was flying at a strange, tilted angle. Finally, the intercom crackled. It was Captain Henderson. His voice was trembling, not with fear, but with a profound, staggering relief. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Henderson." He took a long, shaky breath. We have had a critical catastrophic failure in our starboard engine. We experienced a 1-in-a-million event. A harmonic resonance cascade in the low-pressure turbine. It's a scenario that, well, frankly, it's a scenario we're not trained for. It's not in the simulator. It should not be possible. He paused again, and the sound of him wiping his face was audible. We are all, and I mean every single one of us, unbelievably fortunate tonight, because by an act of God, I cannot explain the man who designed the containment system for that exact failure. The man who wrote this procedure that our engineers theorized might work was on this aircraft. The cabin was holding its collective breath. That procedure, the captain continued, his voice thick with emotion, involved a complex counterintuitive sequence of de-throttling the engine while manually overriding the fuel flow harmonics. It's not a procedure for a pilot. It's a procedure for an engineer. An engineer like Mr. David Harrison from Seat 2C. A collective gasp swept the plane. All eyes turned to the man who was still quietly holding his family. Mr. Harrison, the captain said, joined us in the cockpit, and he talked us through it. He saved this aircraft. He saved all our lives. We have shut down the starboard engine and the fire is contained. We are stable. We will be making an emergency landing in Gander, Newfoundland. We should be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. But we are safe. We are all safe. Thanks to him. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The shock was too profound. Then, a single passenger in economy started to clap. The sound was joined by another. And another. Within seconds, the entire aircraft, all 200 passengers and crew, were erupting in a thunderous, desperate, grateful standing ovation. People were crying. They were cheering. They were looking at David Harrison as if he were a prophet. He looked up, his face humbled and exhausted. He gave a small, almost embarrassed wave. Karen Miller did not clap. She couldn't. Her hands were frozen. Her mind was a vortex of impossible, terrifying realizations. Harmonic resonance. Her lie. Her fabricated career-making lie. It was real, and the man she had mocked, the man she had dismissed with racist, entitled vitriol, was the one man on earth who knew how to stop it. He hadn't just saved her life. He had saved her from her own lie. If this plane had gone down, the Aegis system would have been blamed. Her fake report would have been seen as a Cassandra-like prophecy. Her firm aerocore would have become the global standard built on the ashes of this flight. She would have been rich, famous, and a murderer. and he had stopped it. He had saved her from becoming a monster. She felt a sudden violent wave of nausea. The champagne and the adrenaline and the raw psychic shock were too much. She fumbled for the sickness bag in her seat pocket, her entire body shaking. The sound of the applause for David Harrison was a deafening roar of her own failure. The landing at Gander was tense. The single-engine approach in the dark, the foam on the runway, the fleet of fire trucks and ambulances waiting. It was a scene from a nightmare. But Captain Henderson, with David Harrison's calculations on a notepad next to him, set the massive plane down as gently as a feather. The moment the wheels touched, a new wave of applause and sobs swept the aircraft. They were alive. They were not allowed to deplane immediately. They sat on the tarmac for an hour as safety crews inspected the ruined engine. Karen sat in her pod, shivering, her blanket pulled up to her chin. She avoided looking at row 2. She couldn't. Finally, the captain emerged from the cockpit. He didn't head for the exit. He walked straight into the business class cabin and stopped at row 2. He bypassed Karen, bypassed Mr. Chen, and stood before David Harrison. The entire cabin watched. "David," Captain Henderson said, his voice raw. He didn't offer a handshake. He pulled David into a fierce, desperate hug. I don't know what to say. Thank you, doesn't... You did the flying, Robert," David said quietly, patting the captain's back. "I just read the manual I wrote." The captain pulled back, his eyes shining. He looked at Maria. "Dr. Harrison, you saved a life." He looked at the kids. "You two have the most incredible parents in the world." He then turned and addressed the quiet cabin, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need to explain to all of you just what happened, and I need to explain why the Harrison family was invited to board this plane first." Karen felt the blood drain from her face. "I have known of David Harrison for 10 years, the captain began. "He is, until his retirement last month, the lead propulsion and safety engineer for the company that builds these GEnx engines. He is the man who designed the Aegis containment system, the very system that just saved us. It's a system he spent his entire career perfecting based on a theory of harmonic resonance that most of the industry dismissed as impossible." Karen's sickness bag felt heavy in her lap. "David is a legend. He's a genius. And this airline, Transatlantic Air, owes him a debt we can never repay. Not just for tonight, but for the safety of every 787 in our fleet. We were flying him, Dr. Harrison and their children, to London for the Royal Aeronautical Society's gold medal ceremony." He beamed at David. "He's being honored. The innovator of the decade. The invitation to board first was not just a courtesy. It was a mark of profound respect from our entire company, from me personally. I requested them on my flight. It was meant to be an honor." The captain's face darkened as he remembered the scene at the gate. His eyes slowly panned the cabin and settled with pinpoint accuracy on seat 1A, on Karen Miller. "It was a mark of respect," he repeated, his voice dropping to an icy, furious calm that was not shared by everyone. Karen felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. The passengers who had heard her, the crew who had been admonished by her, Mr. Chen who had warned her, and the Harrison family. She had not just been rude. She had not just been racist. She had publicly, loudly, and viciously insulted the very man who was being honored for making her flight safe. The man who would, hours later, literally save her life from an impossible event. It was a humiliation, so total, so profound, it was almost biblical. "We will be deplaning and moving to a hotel while a new aircraft is sourced," the captain said, his gaze still locked on Karen. "The Harrison family and the gentleman Dr. Harrison saved will be our guests in the first-class lounge. The rest of us will follow the ground crew." He turned his back on her. "David, Maria, please, let's get you and your children away from all this." He personally escorted the Harrison family off the plane, shielding them from the other passengers. As David Harrison passed Karen's seat, he paused for just a fraction of a second. He looked at her crumpled in her seat, a picture of abject shame. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head, a small, sad gesture of pity, and walked away. The Gander Airport Hotel was a functional beige building swarmed by dazed passengers and increasingly by the media. The miracle at 30,000 feet was the breaking news story of the hour. A plane saved from a catastrophic theoretical failure by the engineer who predicted it. It was a story too good to be true. Karen Miller found a quiet corner in the lobby, her phone pressed to her ear. She was on a desperate video call with her contact in London, James Sterling, the head of Sterling Price. It was 10 a.m. in London. Her original meeting was long since missed. "James, thank God I reached you," Karen said, trying to sound professional, though her voice was shaking. "Yes, I'm fine, I'm safe. It was dreadful. A total nightmare. Listen, I am so sorry I missed the meeting, but as you can see, it was unavoidable. I'm trying to get on the next flight out of here. We must reschedule." James Sterling, a sharp man in a Savile Row suit, looked at her through the screen with an odd expression. "Karen, good God, we've been seeing the reports. It's all over Sky News. Appalling. But what a hero. What a story." Yes, a real hero," Karen said impatiently, eager to get to the point. The last thing she wanted to talk about was David Harrison. "Now, about the pitch. I know we're delayed, but the Aegis failure. James, this proves my point. The system is vulnerable." James Sterling frowned. "What proves your point?" "Karen, what are you talking about? The reports are saying the Aegis containment system is what saved the plane. It worked. It contained an impossible event. The airline stock and the engine manufacturers are going to soar when the markets open." Karen's blood ran cold. "James, that's the media spinning it. My data, the data I was bringing you, shows..." "Karen," James interrupted, his voice turning cold. "I think there's something you should know. One of our senior partners was on that flight with you." Karen's stomach twisted. "What? Who?" "He was flying back from a New York trip. He was meant to be in your meeting today to give his final assessment of you and AeroCorps. He likes to evaluate potential partners in the wild. See who they really are." From across the lobby, Karen saw him, Mr. Arthur Chen, the man from seat 1B. He was on his own phone, and he was walking toward her. "Ah, Arthur, you're on the line," James said, his screen now showing a split. "Karen Miller. I believe you've met Arthur Chen." Mr. Chen stopped 5 feet from Karen. He was no longer a quiet, elderly passenger. He was a shark. His eyes were cold steel. "We met James," Arthur Chen said, his voice cutting through the lobby's noise. "Though met is a generous term. I had the profound displeasure of sitting across from Ms. Miller for 6 hours." "Arthur, what's going on?" Karen stammered. James, Arthur said, ignoring Karen, the pitch is dead. The aero-core deal is off. What, why? Karen shrieked, causing several passengers to look. My data is... Your data, Arthur Chen scoffed. Ms. Miller, I am the lead investor for Sterling Price's aerospace division. I read your entire pitch deck last night. Those instability figures. The harmonic resonance scenario. It was, creative. But it was a lie. How do you know? Karen whispered. Because the man who saved our lives, David Harrison, is an old colleague of mine from my days at MIT. We serve on the same aeronautical board. I know his work. I know him. Your report was a slanderous, fabricated piece of corporate sabotage designed to ruin him and his legacy. No, and not only that, Mr. Chen continued, his voice dripping with contempt. I watched you, at the gate. You publicly racially profiled a man and his family. You abused a gate agent. You sneered at his wife, a brilliant doctor, who also saved a life on that flight. And then you had the gall to try and profit from an emergency that your pitch was based on. You, Ms. Miller, are not just a bad businesswoman. You are a morally bankrupt human being. On the screen, James Sterling's face was white with fury. Karen, you based our entire acquisition strategy on a lie. You tried to tank a competitor's stock with fabricated data, and you did it while sitting next to one of my senior partners. James, please, I can explain. No, you're done, James said. The finality in his voice was absolute. Aerocore's proposal is dead. Sterling Price will not be doing business with you or them ever. And you? You are fired. Effective immediately. A security team is already on its way to your office. Don't bother flying to London. Don't contact our firm again. The video call ended. Karen Miller stood in the hotel lobby, her phone dangling from her hand. Her career, her deal, her status, everything. It was all gone, wiped out in an instant. Across the lobby, a news crew had cornered the Harrison family. David, looking uncomfortable but dignified, was speaking. I'm not a hero, he was saying. The heroes are the flight crew, the pilots Captain Henderson, and my wife. She saved a man's life. I did my job. I'm just grateful I was in a position to help. I'm grateful we're all safe and we can get to London to see the ceremony. He put his arm around Maria and pulled his children close. They were a portrait of grace, dignity, and quiet strength. Karen watched invisible as the world celebrated the man she had tried to destroy, and who had saved her in return. The 24 hours in Gander were for Karen Miller a masterclass in irrelevance. While the Harrisons, Mr. Chen, and even Mr. Joyce, the man doctor, Harrison had saved, were sequestered in a private lounge at the hotel, Karen was left to mill about in the general lobby with the other 190-odd passengers. Her name, once a key that opened any door, was now just a name on a list. She spent the morning in a beige corner of the hotel's breakfast buffet, her phone pressed to her ear, leaving a series of increasingly desperate unanswered voicemails. Dennis, it's me, again. Why is my corporate Amex frozen? You need to fix this, now. Mr. Patterson, she said, calling her CEO directly. Sir, there has been a misunderstanding regarding the Sterling Price contract. I need to speak with you before you speak to Arthur Chen. He doesn't have the full context. She overheard snippets of conversation from the other passengers, all of them reliving the terror and the miracle. Did you see her? A woman was saying. The doctor. She was like an angel. So calm. And her husband, another chimed in. My cousin's an engineer. He says what this Harrison guy did is It's like rewriting physics in mid-air. They're calling him a genius. Karen watched invisible as a black sedan pulled up to the hotel's side entrance. Captain Henderson emerged looking fresh in a new uniform and personally escorted the entire Harrison family out. He shook David's hand. He hugged Maria, and he even high-fived Elijah. They were driven away, not with the other passengers, but separately with the dignity of visiting heroes. When the announcement finally came that the new aircraft was ready, Karen went to the transatlantic counter set up in the lobby. She pushed to the front. "Karen Miller, 1A, I need my boarding pass." The agent, a young woman with a patient, practiced smile, typed in her name. The smile faltered. She frowned, typed again, and then looked up at Karen with an expression of polite neutrality. "I'm sorry, Miss Miller, your ticket has been modified." Modified. "What does that mean? I am Platinum Premier. I am booked in 1A. "Ma'am?" the agent said, her voice dropping. "Your original corporate card was declined for the re-ticketing fee. And it says here your Platinum Premier status has been formally suspended by our corporate office pending review." "Suspended?" Karen's voice was a sharp, ugly sound. "On what grounds?" The agent read from the screen, her voice flat. "It cites in-flight conduct and moral turpitude clause based on formal complaints from the crew and first-class passengers. Ma'am, we have a seat for you. Seat 42E. Karen stared, speechless. 42E. It was a death sentence. "And," the agent continued, "you will need to pay the checked baggage fee. Your status-based waiver is no longer valid." Karen fumbled for her personal credit card, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. It was a card she hadn't used in years. It went through barely. The agent handed her a flimsy paper boarding pass. Karen Miller was no longer a name. She was a number. 42E. The walk to the gate was a new kind of walk of shame. She was in Group 9, the absolute last group to board. She stood in line, her head down her immaculate suit, now a roadmap of wrinkles and travel filth. To get to seat 42E, she had to walk through the global first-class cabin. There they were, the Harrisons. The airline, in a gesture of profound gratitude, had given them the entire front-row suite. The space was enormous. Maya was fast asleep under a plush duvet, her book on the table next to her. Elijah was showing Captain Henderson, who was visiting off-duty, something on his laptop, and both were laughing. Dr. Maria Harrison was sipping tea, a look of utter earned peace on her face. As Karen shuffled past her carry-on, bumping the wall, David Harrison looked up. Their eyes met. Karen expected to see anger. She expected to see triumph. She saw neither. He just looked at her. He saw the rumpled suit, the pale face, the humiliation. He didn't look angry. He just looked done. He had saved her life, and now she was no longer his problem. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if dismissing her from his existence, and then turned back to his wife. Mr. Chen was in the cabin too, in seat 2A. He saw her coming and pointedly, deliberately turned his body away to ask Ben Carter, who was fluffing his pillow, for more sparkling water. The walk back to row 42 felt like a mile. She finally found 42E. The middle seat, cramped, non-reclining, and directly adjacent to the chemical flushing smell of the lavatories. She squeezed in between a man who was already snoring and a teenager with headphones bleeding tinny music. The flight was 6 hours of misery. She was invisible. When Ben Carter came by with the drink cart, his professionalism was a cold, sharp blade. "Ma'am, anything to drink?" His voice was perfectly, chillingly neutral. "Water," she rasped. "And A blanket. It's freezing back here. Ben's smile was a thin line. I'm afraid all our blankets have been distributed to our priority cabins, ma'am. We don't have any extras for the main cabin this evening. He handed her a tiny plastic cup of water and moved on his warmth reserved for every other passenger in the row. She sat shivering for the entire flight. Her laptop was in the overhead bin, dead. Her phone was dead. She had no one to call, nothing to read, nothing to do but sit in the dark and think. She replayed every word she had spoken at that gate. What gives them the right? You people always want a handout, reverse discrimination. Every syllable was a fresh wave of shame. She landed at Heathrow in a cold, driving rain. She was the absolute last person off the plane, stuck behind a family struggling to fold a stroller in the aisle. The terminal was a new hell. The fast-track immigration lane she had used 100 times was roped off to her. She waited for 45 agonizing minutes in the all other passports line, her feet throbbing. She got to baggage claim. The carousels were a chaotic mess. She watched as the priority bags came out first, including the Harrisons' immaculate luggage, which was respectfully pulled off the belt by an airline representative. Karen waited for an hour. Her bag, stripped of its bright orange Platinum Premier tag, was the last one to emerge, its sides smeared with grease. She dragged it toward the exit. The black cab line was long and expensive. Her corporate car service was, of course, not there. She went to the Heathrow Express kiosk, the high-speed train to the city. One first-class ticket to Paddington. She tapped her personal Amex. Card declined. She flushed. She tried her debit card. Insufficient funds. Her company had not just frozen her corporate accounts, they had frozen her assets. Humiliated, she dug through her purse, her hands shaking. She found a crumpled wad of cash, about £80 emergency money. It wasn't enough for a cab. It was barely enough for... She followed the blue signs for the public transport buses. She stood at the central bus station, the wind and rain lashing at her, soaking her $1,000 suit jacket. She was just another tired, wet, broke traveler. Her phone, plugged into a wall outlet for 2 minutes, buzzed on its last 1% of battery. A single final text message from her CEO, Mr. Patterson. You are a disgrace to this firm. Don't ever use my name as a reference. The board is considering legal action for willful sabotage of the Sterling Price contract and gross reputational damage. Your office is sealed. Your employment is terminated. The phone died, the screen going black. She looked up, her face numb. Across the bus lane was a large newsstand. The front page of the Times was glaring at her under the fluorescent light. The headline, The Quiet Genius, the man who saved Flight 112. The photo wasn't from Gander. It was from London. David Harrison, his arm around Maria Elijah and Maya at their sides, all of them dressed impeccably smiling as they were greeted at the airport by a delegation from the Royal Aeronautical Society. They looked strong. They looked dignified. They looked like family. A red double-decker bus, the N9 to Aldwych, pulled up its engine, groaning and its brakes hissing in the rain. It was the night bus. It was dirty, crowded, and smelled of wet wool. Karen Miller, the closer the Platinum Premier flyer. The woman who ruled boardrooms picked up her heavy, non-priority bag. The bus door hissed open. She hauled her luggage up the steps, her face a mask of anonymous, rain-streaked misery, and disappeared into the crowd. The hard karma had finally landed, leaving her with nothing but the one thing she truly deserved, the crushing, inescapable, and permanent weight of her own choices. In the end, Karen Miller wasn't defeated by a failed business deal or an airline complaint. She was defeated by her own prejudice. She was so blinded by the color of a family's skin that she couldn't see the hero standing right in front of her. She mocked the doctor who would save a life, and she insulted the engineer who would save her own. This story is a powerful, real-life reminder that our character isn't defined by our status, our title, or our frequent flyer miles. It's defined by how we treat people, especially when we think no one important is watching. The Harrisons, with their quiet dignity and profound skill, showed what true special status looks like. What did you think of Karen's karma? Was it deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of life, drama, and karma.